Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by energy and environment reporter Breanne Deppisch. Breanne, there's a lot going on in California on the energy front right now. Air conditioning problems, got to turn down your air conditioning, trying to keep the lights on. Talk a little bit about what the situation is. Why are we seeing these problems for consumers there?
Yeah, so a lot's really happened in California these past few days. Regulators there actually started issuing the first of what is expected to be a series of flex outages, which is basically a voluntary step asking consumers in the state to reduce electricity consumption between 4 and 9 p.m. That's when the grid is the most strained. A lot of solar power goes offline during that time. And obviously because the sun starts setting, but AC use doesn't decrease. So the strain on the grid is especially high. They also asked consumers to turn up their AC to 78 degrees during that time and to halt all charging of EV vehicles and like the use of large appliances. That's all part of a step to deal with a heat wave that's coming, expected through next week. And Gavin Newsom also declared a energy supply emergency yesterday. And lawmakers approved extending the life of Diablo Nuclear Canyon for another 5 years.
So this is kind of an interesting development for California Governor Gavin Newsom. Obviously, when the power grid has problems in your state, that can be politically very problematic for you. He's become a big part of the Democrats' midterm election messaging, clearly has some future ambitions of his own. How are Californians sort of reacting to being told that you have to turn down their air conditioning and things like that in the summertime?
It's interesting. I think we're seeing, in California, I think in a lot of places, I've heard a lot of messaging saying, you can pre-cool your homes. How cool, you can do that, especially amidst a heat wave that's expected to bring triple-digit temperatures through a lot of the state. How much you can kind of pre-cool your home remains to be seen. And what impact those flex alerts really have on the state is also just kind of a variable, since it is voluntary. This isn't a great time for Democrats in California. They've been forced to kind of grapple with the fact that a lot of their efforts to pursue, really ambitious renewable energy and ramp up those efforts and take a lot of existing, fossil fuel powered plants offline. And up until this past week, they were planning to shut Diablo in the next couple of years. So they've been forced to kind of backtrack on all that and be like, no, grid reliability is paramount. Because at the end of the day, I think they would rather, kind of find a middle ground on those issues than be held responsible for blackouts like they saw in 2020.
Absolutely. But of course, not charging your electric vehicles at night is a little bit off message, given that electric cars are a pretty big priority for California.
Especially, since last week, they announced their big thing that was, to ramp up EV production and, and halt all sales of, traditional gas-powered vehicles. In the next couple of years. So some mixed messaging.
Absolutely mixed messaging. California is not the only place, though, struggling with energy problems, worrying about keeping the lights on. Talk about the situation in Europe. Obviously, ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine took place, there's been a lot of wrangling about how to keep energy prices affordable in countries that are dependent on Russian oil, to keep the sanctions in place to deter the Russians, but also things that have been disrupted purely as a result of the war itself. What have been some of the latest developments on that front?
Yeah, so really interestingly, the EU is continuing to grapple with this really unprecedented, energy price crisis. We've seen prices that are absolutely just record-shattering. It's due in part to a couple things. It's, obviously Russia's war in Ukraine and sanctions, which have prompted it to halt gas flow via its Nord Stream pipeline. They shut it off this week for a 3-day planned maintenance period, but, there's not much hope that they're going to return to full capacity. I don't think that's something that anyone anticipates. If they do return to capacity, it'll be about 20%. So yeah, this week leaders said they were going to embrace both short and long-term measures to help, to help drive home the soaring energy costs for consumers. In the short term, this would involve invoking a price cap on, natural gas and other things. And then in the long term, this would actually involve just a fundamental restructuring of the way that their power market is designed, which is a pretty big deal. It's been in place for 25 years, but a lot of times it ties actually electricity prices to natural gas and fossil fuels, which obviously are the most expensive. So in a supply crisis like this, it's not the best model to have in place.
Sure. But there does seem to be a little bit of a split within the European Union about, at least in the short term, about how much to wean countries off of Russian oil.
Yes, I think a lot of that depends on how much they already have in their gas tanks, and how much they think they will feasibly be able to import from other suppliers through liquefied natural gas. And it's how much they can do depends. It's very depends on the specific country. Obviously, Germany's in a really tight spot. Belgium's in a really tight spot. Those are two of the countries that are most subject to the really high prices. But it has touched off a big affordability crisis in all of Europe and the UK.
U.S. is somewhat insulated from that, but obviously we've had our own energy crisis, and gas prices obviously were an issue. They're still an issue now. They were a bigger issue earlier in the summer. Seems to the Biden administration has been very happy to say that the numbers have been going down. The prices at the pump have been going down. Are we expecting that to continue?
I've not heard much on this front about what's to come in the next couple weeks, but it is interesting. I had a source point out to me last week. He's like, this is really being touted as like a huge win by the Biden administration and by Democrats. But if you look at prices, they're still $1 or higher than they were at the same point last year. Right. So to be clear, that there is definitely still a much higher price for a lot of energy sources than.
Which cannot all be explained by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is a little over 6 months old.
Exactly.
Right.
We can only blame a certain amount of things on them, but yeah.
Right. You can only pump Putin so much.
Exactly.
Thank you, Breanne.
Thank you.
You can read Breanne and subscribe to our newsletter daily on energy at washingtonexaminer.com.